This is Maximus Aviation.
Well, if you're a fan of the channel, you know we've been following the adventures of astronauts Butch Cassidy Wilmore and Sunny Sundance Williams, who have been stranded at the space station now for 60-plus days. But I've heard that Boeing has taken great umbrage with me and others in the media who say that Butch and Sunny are stranded in space, because NASA wants you all to know that they are in fact not stuck or stranded or marooned on the International Space Station. As a matter of fact, they are free to leave at any time. Well, except for the part where they're not. Propaganda aside, NASA and Boeing have a problem. A big problem.
You got a little problem? I got a big problem, Jerry!
And while that's pretty much a normal position for NASA and Boeing to be in, however, Butch and Sunny can in fact come home anytime they want. All NASA and Boeing have to do is pick up the phone or tweet or X Elon Musk and simply ask him to use his perfectly fine Crew Dragon vehicle that has carried over 50 astronauts over the past 4 years and never had a problem. However, therein lies the problem. And in fact, speaking of Twitter or X, social media kinda has a lot to do with it. More on that in a minute. But the problem is that if NASA does reach out to SpaceX, then they are admitting before the world and God that two of the once mightiest aerospace companies in the history of the universe have failed. Again. But NASA and Boeing, being basically another arm of the US government, as with recent events in our US government, NASA is telling you not to believe your lying eyes, but just take our word for it and go about your way. But instead of being upfront with the American people and the world and just saying, yeah, we got some problems and we'd love for SpaceX to bring our crew home, Boeing and NASA can't afford to do that from a reputational standpoint. But they also can't afford to risk putting Butch and Sundance back in that capsule, because although they've been working on fixing what's wrong with the thrusters, they still have no clue what the cause was. So if the thrusters are working fine when they undock, the danger of a failure on re-entry is about 50-50 at best. But like I said in my last video, neither Boeing nor NASA can afford one more dead human on their watch. But even after the Columbia and Challenger disasters, which were directly the result of NASA managers putting mission ahead of human safety, still today it feels like NASA really wants to put the crew back on the Starliner and roll the dice and take their chances. However, it's a different world today than it was during the shuttle program. And as I mentioned earlier, in a world now that has billions of journalists on platforms like X, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, there's no way for NASA and Boeing to hide if they mess this one up and lose Butch and Sunny to a fiery death on re-entry, especially when Elon Musk's SpaceX Crew Dragon is ready to go this month, and even sooner if needed. However, the choices Boeing and NASA face in this decision they are debating right now have far-reaching ramifications for both companies. So a decision that seems simple on its face and one that you and I think's a no-brainer. You don't risk human life at any cost and send them home on SpaceX Crew Dragon to live to fight another day. But right now, NASA is like a gambler who thinks just one more roll of the dice and their luck will turn. However, that's a really dangerous game to play when lives are on the line. But even though NASA wants me to stop saying Butch and Sunny are stranded in space, some NASA astronauts this week, on condition of anonymity, let it leak that indeed NASA is in active discussions with Elon Musk and SpaceX on launching this month with 2 less crew members to make room for Butch and Sunny. And if you've been watching my videos on this subject, you know I've been saying that all along. Butch and Sunny will not be coming back on Starliner. And yes, Butch and Sunny are senior experienced astronauts as well as test pilots. And they knew they were going to go on a ship that failed to reach the space station 5 years ago on its maiden uncrewed test flight in 2019, which failed spectacularly. Yet they managed to get it back to Earth. But it was still a 50-50 decision back in 2019. But it didn't matter because no human lives were involved. But now they are. And yes, these seasoned astronauts knew what they were signing up for. In an interview back in March of this year, Sunny was quoted as saying, "With an experimental spacecraft, there are things that haven't been done before. We really want to make sure that all works and is fine." She explained that dynamic events like docking and manually flying would be especially tricky, despite all their simulator training. And then she said this, The hair on the back of our neck is going to stand up a little bit more when we do these things. Well, it's like Sonny could see into the future, because that's exactly what happened. So like I said, this seems to be a no-brainer for you and me. Just bring them home on the Crew Dragon and remotely bring home Starliner and work the bugs out later. However, NASA nor Boeing can afford to let that happen. NASA often emphasizes that astronaut safety remains their top priority in making decisions about human spaceflight. But the choice NASA now faces has ramifications far beyond just letting the crew hitch a ride on Elon's rocket. Because the decision NASA is facing also threatens Boeing's involvement in NASA's human space program. Already, Boeing Starliner's losses have cost them more than $1.5 billion due to repeated setbacks, defects, and years of delays in their development of the brokeback Starliner. However, if NASA backs Boeing, and to use a Challenger phrase, they take off their engineering hats and put on their management hats and return Wilmore and Williams on the Starliner, then that puts NASA and Boeing on the hook for the lives of Butch and Sonny, and that is an unquantifiable amount of risk. A major failure during the return with the astronauts' lives at stake would put NASA under the spotlight with calls to end Boeing's involvement in the program. Conversely, if NASA decides to send Starliner back empty, that too will make Boeing look bad, as it would be a vote of no confidence in Boeing that may lead to the company cutting its losses and getting out of the space program altogether and just focusing on their other catastrophes. And with Boeing's new rockstar CEO, he would be wise to probably make that happen anyway. Okay, so then what happens if NASA takes Elon Musk's SpaceX alternative and Starliner autonomously returns home without incident? Well, then NASA is open to blowback from overreacting to a situation that it publicly declared for weeks was not a significant risk. And while all those statements I just said are valid arguments, none of that matters when human lives are at stake. You bring them home the safest way possible and take your lumps, and do your Secret Service style walk of shame and move on. But remember, I said NASA and Boeing are far more tied to politicians that fund them than SpaceX backed by the richest man in the world, who seems to have perfected the art of space travel in a decade, something which NASA and Boeing have been doing for over 60 years. So to nutshell it, either Boeing nor NASA wants to end up with egg on their face. But like I said, it's a new social media TikTok world out there today, and there's nowhere to hide anymore. Still, publicly NASA is telling the world and the media that Starliner is fine, and they will work the bugs out and bring Butch and Sonny home. Meanwhile, cut to Elon and the boys fueling up the Crew Dragon. But to quote the Atlantic magazine, that kind of obfuscation forces observers to read between the lines. It's not unreasonable to conclude that NASA believes bringing the astronauts home before they've gone over Starliner with a fine-tooth comb is simply too risky. And a retired astronaut told The Atlantic, speaking anonymously of course, NASA doesn't feel comfortable putting them in that vehicle. Otherwise, they would have put them in it already. Lori Garver, a former deputy NASA administrator and the author of the memoir My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age, she said Starliner's first crewed flight is a test mission. Anomalies are to be expected, and NASA is well equipped to handle them. After all, this is the agency that rescued the Apollo 13 crew with a room full of engineers, cardboard, and duct tape. So it's no stranger to improvising solutions to unexpected problems. Even more important, NASA owes the public as much transparency as possible. After all, it is a taxpayer-funded agency, and a few $billion of its budget have gone directly into the Starliner program. So it's more discouraging that NASA appears more focused on shaping the story than to their mandate to provide unfettered information to taxpayers. But like I said, even though NASA has privately told Elon Musk of their plan to leave behind 2 of the 4 Crew Dragon astronauts for this upcoming mission to the ISS to make room for Butch and Sonny, still publicly, like the Wizard of Oz, NASA is saying pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, as NASA continues to insist the crew is in no danger and are not stranded or marooned or whatever adjective you want to put in there. However, all of NASA's attempts to refute that lost in space narrative have been, to quote The Atlantic, both ineffective and baffling, because for almost 2 whole months now, NASA officials have repeatedly claimed that in an emergency, Starliner could simply whisk the astronauts away from the ISS and deliver them safely back to Earth. But clearly that is far from the truth because they would have brought them back by now. So in closing, it's good to know that NASA is talking to SpaceX because you and I both know they will be coming home on Crew Dragon. Plus, I think this handsome fella here, new Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg, will not give the okay to a dangerous mission that could potentially kill the crew on a Boeing vehicle on his first month on the job. And with that, you are all caught up to date on the latest chapter of the wild and zany space adventures of Butch and Sundance. But now I need you to share your thoughts with me. But I won't know until you let me know down below. So let me know. And as always, thank you for choosing my little aviation channel on the YouTubes. And until next time, stay safe, hug somebody you love, and remember, yeah, this is Maximus.